discussion about time and money. We're having John's here this morning. He's going to present basically, I guess, what he knows about time, money, and how basically he can basically advise us about what to do, how we manage our time and money properly. To be quite honest, I wasn't really sure if I was going to talk about this at the moment, but I just got a message from Jesse just saying, Jimmy, you're going to be saying something. So here it is. I pass it on straight to John.
Unmute.
Yeah.
Oh, look,
now.
Unmuted. I don't want to look at myself. Thanks everyone for logging in. So the plan is today that I'm going to just do a short talk or presentation on some stuff that I've thought about with time and money. It's probably going to be about 10 minutes. We'll see how long it goes for. And then I really am more interested in a bit of a Q&A. And what I'm doing is I'm not going to be specifically, I hope, I'm not specifically going to be sharing out of, here's a part of the Bible, because this is a big topic and you could go to one part of the Bible and just say, and explore. We've sort of done that already with Penno Connect, with that passage in Philippians. So what I'm going to be hopefully doing is just sharing some of my, I hope, godly wisdom and Bible influence over many, many years, and how I think we should be approaching this topic of using our time and money effectively. You have to weigh whether what I say is wise or not. And I've prepared just a few slides, which I'm hoping will work well. Can I share screen? So I'll start with this. If we think about time and money, they are basically resources that we have. And they're also, the nature of these resources is it's hard to separate them from our sense of who we are and self. So obviously our time is our time, it's our life. And even our money ends up being, well, it's my money, it's my resource, however we use that. So with these two, it's not like there's something outside of who we are. Let's see how my, now I've got to click over to my PowerPoint. How do I do this so I move on? Next slide on my PowerPoint. Here we are. So uniting those two together, ultimately, if we're a follower of Jesus, well, at one level, even if we're not, God is sovereign over ourself and our resources. And if we're following Jesus, well, God is Lord of both ourself and our resources, this united thing. In fact, who I am as a person is only because God's created me and chose me. And so that is a gift from God. And in fact, my time, therefore, is a gift from God. He controls my coming and my going. He knows the numbers of our days. And my money, any resources that I have financially, they are also a gift from God. So we shouldn't think about, I'm trying to say, don't think about your time and money independent from yourself as a person, as a being. And don't forget that they are gifts from God, that you are responsible before them. God, everything you have in terms of time and money comes from the living God, and he is sovereign, he is Lord over the whole bunch. So in one sense, you can say it's not your time, it's not your money, it is God's gift to you. And it's not easily separated from yourself. Now, what do you do with these resources? How do we handle them in a way that pleases God? Well, what is the greatest commandment? What does God really expect more than anything else? What is the greatest commandment? Jesus answered, the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind and all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. All of the law and the prophets hang on these two commands. So what do I do with my resources that are so tightly linked to who I am? I'm to love the Lord my God with all my heart and all my soul and all my life and all my strength. And I'm to love my neighbor as myself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two things. What do you do with your money? Just get the fundamentals right. It is there to love God and to love your neighbor. Everything hangs on that. So it's a pretty simple way of approaching this topic. What do you do? How do you use your time and your money? You use them to love God and love your neighbor. End of story. And I think it's important that you don't separate these from your sense of self under God, both as gifts from God and God's sovereignty. I hope that has been just a helpful starting framework. Now, if we're going to talk about love, my little red arrows there, love is not controlled by the law. Love is controlled by grace and mercy. The law may help in certain circumstances to put boundaries around how we express our love. Let me see if I can stop screen sharing here. Just give me a second. So I think I'm done with those. Hopefully those are just a couple of graphics to help us get framed. So when we're thinking about time and money use, it can be very helpful to have boundaries, but actually as Christians, we're not to be controlled by the law. There's no rules, is what I'm saying. Love doesn't operate according to rules. It operates according to the heart, according to the focus on others and God. And so the big question is, will I use myself? Will I let myself be controlled by love so that my resources are used to love God and love others? Or will I use myself and the resources attached to that to look after only myself? In fact, I might actually go back to my share screen thing. I might actually go back to here. If I use my resources, which are so tightly linked to me, only to serve myself, then what I'm basically doing is taking myself and putting it in the place of God. So if you're going to use your time and your money just for yourself and not to love God and love others, you are making yourself God, which is controlled by pride and is ultimately very ugly. They're to be used to love others. And one of the questions I would ask you if you're wondering, how should I use my time or my money, is, are you going to be controlled by grace or by law? Do you want someone to set rules for you? Do you want God to set rules for you? Well, just so you can limit things. You do that to have boundaries. You do that when things are going awry for others, but we want to be people controlled by love. I'm going to start off specifically speaking about time and considering these two things separately. So time. You cannot really separate time from yourself. Time is your life. When you say, I haven't got enough time, because we've all got to find time's finite. It's what God gives us. So time is yourself. And when you say, listen, I haven't really got enough time to do this or to do that, what you're saying is, I haven't got enough of my life. I haven't got enough of myself for that. When you ask the question, how should I best use my time? You're really asking the question, how should I best use my life? And the laws for the best use of your life are quite simple. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. We usually think of time, and even this question, is all the bits that are left over. Once I've got all my non-negotiables out of the way, then I've got time. Now, how do I use my time? When we talk about getting the non-negotiable, when we factor out the non-negotiables, we're actually factoring out things that are above prioritizing for God and for others, because we think that they're non-negotiable. So I really want us to think of time as our life, the entirety of our life. And when I talk about my time, my priorities, I want to challenge that too. All of your life is for God and for others. How do we then use our time to love God and love others? Well, if you start thinking of time as our life, suddenly you realize you need about a third of your life to sleep. And that is not selfish. That is basically falling into God's created pattern and is a function of self-care. And if you start robbing yourself of sleep, you're robbing yourself of your capacity to love God and love others. A third of our time as a generalization often goes into our work or our vocation, however we view that. The reason we work most of the time is so that we can function in God's creation. And it's a loving thing to work because it means we can be independent and build resources to serve others. One of the reasons you work is so you don't stay dependent upon your parents or other people for the rest of your life. It's good to work. So you lose a lot of time just to this vocation thing where we provide resources to survive. And so let's talk about perhaps that other third, which is what we usually talk about. How do I use my time? That remaining third of our time. We use that to love God and love others just like we do the first thing. If I'm rambling a bit, sorry. If we use all of our time just on ourselves, then we are not being loving. Let me talk a bit about work. So you might say, oh, I can't live for work. I get that. I don't think there's any simple answers here. Let me talk about the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison. He's a professed Christian. Do we expect Scott Morrison to work 5 days a week, 8 hours a day? Is that a loving use of his time? I would suspect, and then maybe put a lot of time into preparing a Bible study or serving on a soup kitchen, a bit of time with his family. I actually think a loving thing for the Prime Minister is to put many, many, many hours into his work and to have his work almost control the sum of his life, because he's got a lot of responsibility to love, to express love towards this nation. The recompense that he gets back financially for the time and responsibility he has is probably fairly small by comparison. It's loving for him to work hard through a global pandemic or through bushfires or just for stability. Now, he's also got a youngish family. It's absolutely a priority that he spends time with his family. He's also a Christian. He needs to spend time with other Christians, being encouraged and encouraging others. So he's what, now we're not going to, or Prime Minister, but it's not just as easy enough to say, oh, you're working too hard for some responsibilities. Sometimes our call to love, depending on who we are, calls us into very high demands in certain areas. If you've got a very big family needs, for one reason or another, maybe someone who's ill or very dependent in your family, maybe you'll find you're spending far, far more time showing love towards your family with less time for church and less time for work. And that could well be a loving response, even though your church family doesn't get as much, even though it limits the amount of ministry that you can do. It's also true so I don't think it's as easy as just saying, oh, how do I balance my work demands? Are you working? Is your career for yourself, or are you using it to love God and love others with all your varied responsibilities in life? Self-care also is really, really important. I'm actually hosting a seminar on self-care on Wednesday night. You can look on the email. I'd encourage you to log on and join that if you want. Come on. I've got a dog distracting me. There you go. He's just put his head on my lap. He's been hanging around. Sometimes you just need to take time out to look after yourself, because if you're not looking after yourself, you won't be able to love God and love others. Sometimes it's necessary, as Jesus did, to take time out, to get away from the crowds, to enjoy creation. Also, a good way of loving God is to enjoy his good creation. We're made for the pleasures of this world. And I don't think you should say if I'm enjoying creation or if I'm enjoying some of the comforts and pleasures of creation, that is not a failure to love God. The question is, am I doing that to say that is my focus on myself and sucking everything I can out of the world, or is my focus on giving glory to God and loving others? And so it's a lot of this time stuff. Is it wrong to go to the beach with your friends? No. Are you doing it out of love, or are you doing it because you want to be selfish? I'm looking at my rough notes here. I think as we enjoy creation, we reflect the image of God because we were made for this creation. And so it's not wrong to do that. All of this, I think, I'm going to say something about church and ministry. Loving God means loving his kingdom and purposes. So yes, it's good to put time into serving his kingdom and purposes. And we were made for church. Church is at the center of God's purposes. That is God's people gathering to encourage one another. And so using your time to serve your local committed family of believers is a good and righteous thing to do and should be part of your factoring in of time. It'll be different for different people, giving their gifts, giving their opportunities, giving their work responsibilities. But you should be using your time for church, because church should be at the heart of who you are. I'm not saying that because I'm a pastor and because I get paid by you giving time and money to me. I'm saying that because that's what the New Testament indicates. We are people built for church if you're a follower of Jesus. You're meant to be gathering and loving and supporting one another. You need to be investing time into that. That is an expression of loving others and loving God as a follower of Jesus. So have I given you any nice, neat answers? No. You need to be questioning your motives for how you spend your time. And you need to be trying to grow in a self-awareness. Because some people will be, it's easy to feel, I just need self-care. I need more and more self-care. But if you're all self-care, well, you're probably a selfish person and not really being enough aware of that. If you're constantly burning yourself out with other activities, you're probably a selfish person who's trying to get approval and satisfaction out of doing rather than loving. You've got to be someone made in the image of God, made to love God and made to love others with the time, which is your life. Don't treat it as a spare bits left over after all your other priorities. Your time is your life. It's a resource that can't be separated from the years and days the living God has given you. As you live as his human being in his creation who needs to sleep, who finds righteousness in work, and who has to be part of a church, part of a family, and needs to enjoy God's good creation. Using those same sort of principles, let's talk about money. Money is exchangeable power. If I have lots of money, I have the power to sort of drive a certain sort of a car. I have power to get people to give me food. I have power to buy the sort of food that I want. If I don't have that sort of power. I have power to pay for parking in the city. It is very often an expression of our own personal power. So if I have a lot of power to work and people value my power, then they may pay me more for my labor because they want the power out of my labor. They give me more money. It's exchangeable power in a sense. And if I have lots of power in my work, then I can accumulate that power to use later on when I'm less capable of working. And again, therefore, it's very hard to separate our financial resources from ourself. And this is one of the problems that people have. They value themselves based upon their financial resources. It's a measure of who they are. And in a sense, it's hard to separate the two, particularly when it is a direct result of your labor. So when you're young, you have no money and you are totally dependent upon the resources, the power of other people, usually your parents. When you are elderly, most of the time you're trading off accumulated power, accumulated funds. You've worked through your life and you've accumulated this exchangeable power, and you've got enough power in the bank, literally, to keep supporting yourself. Or, like when you were young, you were totally dependent upon the support, the power of other people to live. So you may get government payments, or you may be dependent upon your family because you no longer have the resources within you to accumulate wealth through your labor. Most of you as young adults are in the space of building up this power and using the strength that you have to be converted into this exchangeable form of power called money. So that's a good thing. It's a great time of life. Now, because you're powerful people in an accumulation phase, how do you use that power to love God and love other people? If you have the attitude that money is not really important, and I've met people, particularly young adults, who think, I don't really care about money. I've somehow got this idea that money is an evil and I just want to live my life freely, independent of any sense of control of money. I think that's a foolish response. Because if you say money doesn't matter, that just means I'm dependent upon other people to take care of me. Or I'm not going to be concerned about this resource that I can accumulate while I'm strong. I don't care about that. It means I don't care about how I'm using my power to bless others. Money is very important. It lets you bless other people. It gives you power to serve others and to honor God. If you use your money, particularly in this accumulation phase of power when you're a young adult, just to and you expend it all, that is also, I think, a very ungodly thing. If you expend it all on yourself, you leave yourself in a powerless state. You leave yourself potentially powerless for the future because you do not accumulate money. And it just all goes onto yourself. And it's not about loving yourself and accumulating for yourself. Let me say, if you've got credit card debt, that's probably a pretty good indication that you're a selfish person who doesn't care about others and doesn't care about the future and wants others to care for you. Do not accumulate credit card debt as just one practical point. It's incredibly expensive and it's saying you're not controlling your expenditure and you're living for today. And you're not being loving. Now that's a generalization. I get it. There may be reasons. But as a generalization, if you're the sort of person who spends so much, you don't, and lots of people do this, they sit there with 18% interest on credit card debt and go from week to week with no accumulation because they're just caring for themselves and saying, I need this today. I'm speaking to the young adults amongst us, while you're in that young adult phase, you should be sensible about saying, I have power. I should be accumulating that power to a measure. I should be using what I have to bless others and to honor God. In terms of meeting your own needs, you'd be surprised how little your needs are in our nation. They can be reduced. And if you've got low income, the way you survive with low income is to reduce your expenditure and live at a lower standard of living. It's pretty straightforward and it can be done. Potatoes are not that expensive. Getting a roof over your head can be done. It's hard in Sydney. That's a big expense in Sydney. But most people can have an incredibly large capacity to reduce their expenditure if they need to. It's also a good thing to use your money to enjoy creation and to care for yourself. It's not unloving. There needs to be a measure, with time management. So with money management, this power, it's good to use some of that power to make sure that I am in a good, healthy space and that I am enjoying God's good creation as he's made me to enjoy it. There's nothing wrong with that. As John Lewis said last week, there's nothing wrong with comfort. It's not ungodly. It shouldn't be an idol. It is important, I think, with our finances, with this exchangeable power to, while you're strong, accumulate it to a measure. Because when you accumulate money, you can use it to love other people. If you're a young adult, most of those here haven't got children. When you get a family, you will find that your funds are being used for your family, and that's love. Now, that can also be distorted, but it's good to have funds accumulated so that when you do get children, when you do get a spouse, you can love them and provide for their needs. It's also important that you have funds to provide for those who are powerless, not just children, but those who are elderly. It's also important to accumulate funds so that you can give and be generous. We've got appeals at the moment for Christian education, for Baptist World Aid, and there's a good chance we'll be soon putting out an appeal for work at Eastwood. You cannot support those if your cup is close to empty. So it's good to make yourself in a position where you can have the cup overflowing. It's also good for many of us to increase our capacity to have this power. So if you get a offer of a promotion at work, it's not wrong to say, it's not ungodly. Every circumstance is different, but it can be a very godly thing to say, yes, I'll take that. I'll get paid 20 grand a year more because that gives me more capacity to love God and love others and to accumulate wealth, to accumulate things for the future. I have more capacity then to use my power to bless others. And therefore, because we're seeking to love God, prioritizing gospel ministry, his kingdom purpose is important. Caring for the poor and needy is absolutely a fundamental part of what it means to have money. We must be generous with it. One of the things, Christian ministry works on the 80-20 rule. And if you ever talk to an NGO, anyone who runs an NGO, thereafter, they get 80% of their funds from 20% of their supporters, and many of them intentionally go and canvass high net worth people. Because high net worth people with high incomes can give big amounts of money. And so many of the ministries that you know are supported by a small number of very wealthy people. I get my income from you guys giving to the church. And I don't know the details, but my guess is it probably falls according to the 80-20 rule. And the bulk of the money given to our church comes from high net worth people. People who have got a lot of power in their capacity to earn, who have accumulated those funds and come to a place in their life where they are able to give big. I don't think it's wrong for some of you to do that with your lives, to be people who earn good money and who have hearts that love God and love others, and to use your accumulation of funds to be big resources for generosity. I don't think it's wrong for some of you to live on very brief means for whatever reason, and therefore have a little bit less capacity. We've all got capacity to give more than we think, though. I think in that sense, we've got different callings, we've got different capacities and different opportunities. If you are someone with less means, one of the big issues with money is envy. Let me say envy is not love. If you don't have as much as someone else and you resent them to a measure, or you start judging them to a measure, that is not love. And the measure of a human being is not based upon how much money they have or the type of house or car, and that goes every which way. Can I say to you, young adults with money, living off your parents is not loving. And your parents are probably trying to be loving for you if they're supporting you, but there comes a stage where I am working and I am earning income, and it's now my time to love. And being dependent upon others when you have resources is not loving. Now, your parents may well be supporting you for good reason, because they want to see you in a healthy space, but you've got to step up and take responsibility for your funds, responsibility to giving money away generously, and responsibility for your future so that you can love others and not be a taker. And again, with your funds, and your church is a central part of your life, you should be giving to your church, because, and not so much to pay me or Jesse or Julian, but we've got to view church as fundamental to our life and what it means to love God and love others, because the Christian life is to be worked out in relationships in a local church. And whatever it takes, not so much to pay me. Part of the reason you pay me is hopefully to teach the word and to put hard yards into the word because we want to live as people around the world. But the reason you do it is to have a community that reflects the very nature of God and shines his light into the world. And if that requires funds, then it's loving and right to do that. And it's not a minor part of your world. So what I've tried to do here is take these two topics and frame them in Jesus' expression of what is the greatest command. It's to love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind, and love your neighbour as yourself. I've tried to steer you away from rules and the law. I've tried to give a bit of what I hope is godly perspective as I've lived my life. A couple of stories, just as I finish. I have a very good friend whose parents have been in ministry for most of their life. They're now, I think, in their early 80s. They were missionaries in Brazil, pastor and wife. My friend worked very long hours for a big multinational at a very prosperous time and has made lots and lots and lots of money. His parents have nothing. They live in America. So the social security system is not as good as it is here in Australia. He basically supports his parents because they have finished ministry and life and have for the last 10 years had nothing. They've also been fairly loose in the way they have managed their money. They haven't been prudent. They've been very generous, but not very prudent with their time and money. Now they've given their life to serve the Lord, but my friend says, he's kind of frustrated because they depend upon him now, rather than getting to the end of their life, having built up enough assets, and they've been living off the generosity of other people their whole life. And my friend is like, he's happy to support them because he sees the need, but he's also frustrated that his mum and dad have not been prudent and have gotten to this stage of life with nothing. So he steps in because he's earned a lot. I don't think it's wise to get to the end of your life with nothing. And that's happened to lots of pastors over the years. As they've given so much up for gospel work, because it means you're dependent upon others. And that's not necessarily loving. That's not to criticize my friend's parents. They've made good godly choices in many ways, but I think there's been a lack of prudence, if I can use that word. Another friend, I was talking to one of the seniors in our church just the other day, where I was talking about that I've got at this seminar. I think I was talking about it. And they said to me, and they're in a place of life where they can now give lots away because they've got so few needs. And what they have coming in is more than adequate. And so they're in a place of life where they can genuinely give a lot away. And they say, she said to me, you can only give if your cup's overflowing. And you've got to make sure you get your cup full. If your cup is always empty with time and money, then you won't be overflowing. You'll be stressed. And I don't think if you're sinking under debt, if you're spending your life sinking so that these things are always a pressure and you have no freedom, that reduces your capacity, your power to love. And so my perspective is, don't live a life where you're always squeezing and reducing your capacity to love. Instead, try to live a life where your cup is full in terms of practical terms of prudence, so that you can then overflow. And when you overflow, you don't build up a bigger cup and look after myself and try and show the world that I'm better, but you love God and you love your neighbor as yourself. So endeth the words of maybe wisdom from Pastor John. I'll hand it back to whoever I'm handing it back to for a time of Q&A.
Oh, thanks, John, for basically providing us some words of advice and words of wisdom as well for how to manage your time and money properly.
I'm also really grateful. Jin's here with us today. He's not usually here with us. He works in finance. And Gim, just because they're more my age, with the years, I'd be keen for them to share if they've got, and the rest of you as well. We've also got Paul Pudman here too, I noticed. So there's people with a bit of wisdom. So we've got, okay, we've got some questions here. Boy, lots of questions.
Sorry, it's all from me. So anyone can feel free to ask questions if you
Do you want me to read?
want.
Do you want me to read off the Q and
Yeah.
Can I believe that if I spend money, time to love others abundantly, God will supply all the resources? God supplies all the resources. I don't know. I'm not 100% sure. I guess what I'm saying, each one of us needs to make our own choices. But if I may use that word prudence again, if your cup is empty all the time, and God, a bit like my friend's parents, yeah, you can do that, but boy, you want to do it in a loving way. If you're finding you're always squeezed and always under pressure because you've made imprudent decisions, then I don't know you're being particularly wise. Are you supposed to live your whole life loving God and loving others? Absolutely. But there's plenty in the scriptures to encourage us in wise use of our resources. Just spend your time reading through Proverbs. It's not wise to be empty for most people. Now, I think God called some people to a ministry like that, but we can't all be in a ministry like that. And so if God is calling you into a ministry like that, of, almost a vow of poverty, if you're going to live a vow of poverty, you better live poor. Otherwise, you're going to be dependent upon others all the time. And feel free to bounce back with any of these questions. Can we use our resources to buy investments like house, stocks to help others more abundantly in the future? What measure should we use to look at our motive in spending our resources for? Okay, first question is absolutely yes. In my answer, that's the measure of prudence. Is there risk in any financial thing like that? Yes. Can you control those risks? Maybe to a measure. Are you in charge of global pandemics? No. Or wars? No. You use your wisdom and your prudence. But yes, you should be doing better than having money in the bank. I'm not a financial advisor. Okay, Jin might want to jump in here. Yes, you should be trying. I think it's righteous and a godly thing to try and maximize your financial capacity in godly ways. That's not gambling. Gambling's bad, wrong, foolishness. And the question there becomes, therefore, let's look at your motives. What are you accumulating wealth for? Well, it may be for your retirement. It may be to love your family. It may be because you've got a goal of wanting to expand the house you lived in. Depending upon your resources, that may not be an ungodly goal. But you want to be examining your motives. Am I loving God and loving others? What measure should we use to look at our motives? Oh, I don't know. Just read your Bible and soak yourself in the gospel. Has anyone got a better answer than that?
Yeah, John, I just chip in because I'm hearing probably, the big topic about money here. And it's always a very key thing for most of us. But yeah, I think like you say, there's a kind of a thin balance of, walking that two subjects. So I probably read from Proverbs 30 verse 7. Verse 7. It says, 2 things I have asked of you, Lord. Do not refuse me before I die. Keep falsehood and lies far from me. Give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me my daily bread. Otherwise, I may have too much and disown you, and says, who is Lord? Or I may have become poor and steal, so that dishonor the name of my God. So I guess when we are all walking this road, there's a time like I see most of you, like my age, young, accumulating a certain share amount of funds that God has given us, either through work or through the means that we put in. But I guess, using that sensibly, and as you go on in life, you will probably know how to put where your money is. But those are the key things that God would, some in Proverbs telling us, we just give enough. God gave us enough to live the day, which is probably the wise thing. Yep.
Thanks, Gim.
This is Kajin. I just want to add just a little bit, in the sense that I think over the years, this is based on my personal experience. I think God has always been faithful, and He has always provided. And really, I think going on our current team to give thanks and really to give, I think, we are all at different stages in life and at different capacities. But one thing, regardless of our situation, I think there's one thing that we cannot forget is to continue to give. Whether it's more or less, it's immaterial in the sense that, God knows our heart and God knows our capacity. And I can, really share to say that over the years, whatever little or whatever I've done, God has continued to bless. And, I don't miss any of the things that I have given, in the sense that there's no lacking. God has always been faithful and provided abundantly. So, I just want to encourage everyone, whatever stage in life that you're in, whatever capacity you think you're in, just continue to trust in God and to give whatever you can, whatever God entrusts you to give. Yeah.
Thanks, KJ. If I can add to that, there is no time in your life that's a good time to give. If you're a young adult, well, you may not have much money. I might have just started earning. I've got no money. I'm trying to be independent. It's not a good time to give. I'm accumulating. Well, it's a good time to give. If you've got a young family that's got so many demands, kids are at school, so many demands, we've got a mortgage, there's no time, never a good time to give. You get to my stage of life, I'm getting ready for retirement. I'm not going to be earning money if I live to 80 or 90. I need to accumulate. And I need to help my kids. There's never a good time to give. You get to old age, there's never a good time to give. My money's dwindling. It's falling away. I can't afford to give it away. There's never a good time to give, except for today, when it's always a good time to give. Because as KGN said, the Lord's always faithful if you're generous. Does tithing still apply today? My simple answer is we're not under the law, we're under grace. We've got some example. We've got an illustration from the Old Testament of a reasonable amount. If you get into the Old Testament tithing, it's not as simple as a 10% thing. There were lots of other gifts, and it was more of a taxation. So it's a little bit of a different comparison. But if you wanted a good index in terms of giving, a good starting point, I think 10% is a pretty good starting point, and it's a starting point. But no, we're not under the law. We're under grace. You give out of love. And God is faithful to those who give, as Kajin said. I've a little bit written in one of our church documents about that, but that's my simple potted answer. Why budget? Well, you budget because it's wise and prudent, because you're responsible for your time and money. Since God, He will provide for me, God can do amazing things and does do amazing things. It just so happens that my friend's parents had a son who made millions and can support them in old age, even though they gave away most of what they earned, and they earned very little. God was faithful. It may work out different for different people. Should we pursue a debt-free lifestyle? Spending as a Christian, and is it feasible for today? Good question.
Just ignore spending. That was typo.
Should we pursue a debt-free lifestyle? Okay, our society runs off debt. Businesses run off debt. We live in a overly debt-soaked society, in my personal opinion, at this current moment. But debt is not a bad thing, and the scriptures, I don't think, would suggest that debt is a bad thing, and debt can very much be leveraged well to care, to love others and to love God. However, for many, many people, debt is a curse that sinks them and traps them. And our finance system, in many ways, makes money out of sinking and trapping people into debt. So you should be very, very cautious with debt. If you cannot control your money, and some people just seem to be absolutely hopeless at it because they're not prudent, then you should be very fearful of debt. If you can control your money, then you can use debt to your advantage if you're wise. Hence how most people buy property with debt. Many people leverage debt for investment, for businesses and other investments if they're wise, but you want to be very, very careful. If you can live a debt-free lifestyle, it takes a lot of pressure off you. Depends how you're wired. Some people are depends how you're wired in some way. Some people are just trapped by debt, even if they've got plenty of funds, because they're just always serving the debt. They don't like being in debt. So I guess my answer to that is, in simple terms, no, you can, and it's a good thing to do that. It kind of depends how you're wired and how you handle finances. Be very cautious with debt, particularly big debt. And in terms of credit card debt, it is toxic because the interest rates are phenomenally high, and you're only ever there because you have not managed your money. So I will hit particularly credit card debt and saying it's toxic. Do not go there ever. So let's talk about credit cards. Credit cards are a great thing. I have a credit card. I get 6 weeks free money out of my credit card, and I get reward points, and it costs me $90 a year. I get money out of my credit card. Now, the system pays for that by putting prices all over the place up, but we live in a credit card society at the moment where most people pay by a credit card. So yes, credit cards can be a great thing, but if you cannot be prudent and manage your money, then they will be toxic. They're just a tool. And for me, they're a good tool because I think I manage my money. And so I get 6 weeks of free money, and I get reward points, which are more than what the credit card costs me, which give me more. So they work for me. But if you spend more and get into debt, they're a disaster. Get rid of it, tear it up, cut it away, throw it away. Practical tips for those who've just started working and getting income. Look, one very, very simple tip. Cut your expenditure well below your income. If you're earning $40,000, live at $20,000. Here's what I think as young adults, seriously, you should be saving 30 or 40% of your funds for the future, for when you get married. If you're married, two of you, double income, no kids, you should be saving an income for the future, for housing. It can be done, but you can only be done if you cut your expenditure. And you can cut your expenditure. You just don't want to. And you should be giving a lot away because you can, with prudence. This is a long question. Under the same principle, use time and money to love others. For those working full-time, helping to others to a greater extent, going on a mission trip can be practically difficult for them. Should we just accept that they can help others by sending money to the missionaries, or should we choose to spend the holiday for a mission trip instead of going on holiday? Spot as we don't have much opportunity to experience helping others physically in a greater community. Good. I think I get the heart behind that question. I think it's a good question. Because I think the heart behind that question is, how can I love people and love God's kingdom with my resources? And relationships matter. So the advantage of a mission trip and using money for a mission trip is to get a heart for the work of God and for the relationships and for the real situation. So do I think that's an imprudent use of funds? Not necessarily. Could you just give that money? Yes. How do you sort this out? You pray about it and you try to be prudent. So I don't know if I've answered that one, but I think that's the wrestle that we all live with. I think you want to be in those wrestles. Yeah?
Can I speak into that question?
Yeah.
I've been to a couple of missionary conferences, and they're always talking about, like, there are missionaries who go, and then there are the mobilizers and the senders at the home church. So, like, all missionaries need senders. They need people to pray for them and financially support them. And so if you're not in a position to go yourself, there are plenty of people who are, and they need money. And so if you have a heart to see that mission being done, then I think, sending money, financially supporting them is a really essential blessing to them. And then in terms of spending your holidays, going on mission trips, I think that kind of each to his own. Like you were saying, John, going on holidays is not a bad thing in itself. And you want to enjoy that time and experience God's creation in other parts of the world. But while you're there, why not pray for the people who are there that you see, and why not be open-minded and have your eyes open as well to see what is happening there in terms of mission. You don't have to practically help if you're only there for a short time, but as we know, prayer is just as much a help as anything. And then there are more local things that you could do while you're full-time working at home. Might not be in a different country, but yeah, there are things that you could do physically to help in your community as well.
Thanks, Annie. It's helpful. I think one of the struggles we've got as a church is to keep the relationship up with our missionaries, because I think if you lose the relationship and it just becomes financial, that's my conviction. It becomes unhelpful, but relationships matter, because the love part and knowing people matters. Gee, there's lots of questions here. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get through them all. So Jimmy or Jesse or someone, if you want to pull the plug, do so. Question from Jules. John, is it really wise to aspire for deathly professions? I don't know what deathly means.
Sorry, that's wealthy. I don't know why the autocorrect is.
Okay, good. I can understand your wisdom in being self-sufficient and loving others, but practically I see most of my friends who have set out for these reasons to do high-paying, high-time-consuming jobs, and honestly, I don't think they're living as Christians. Some have professed so, and others I feel are living in denial. So is it actually godly to pursue these professions? Sometimes it just seems greedy, and I've seen in my life very few successful examples. Good question, Jules. I endorse everything Julian said. The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Greed is idolatry. It is incredibly deceptive. So let me just answer Jules' first question. Is it really wise to aspire for wealthy professions or high-paying professions? It may be, but don't discount the pull of sin and the greed, the idolatry of greed. Keep a close watch on your heart. I'm going to be a little bit personal here. I see we've got Dr. Ron on the bottom of my screen. Is it wrong for Ron to have put all that time into becoming a relatively high-paid professional as a doctor and now a specialist? Well, that's something Ron's going to have to answer. And he's going to say, am I loving God or loving others and loving others? Or am I only doing it because... Sorry, Ron. I picked on you without asking permission.
That's okay.
No, of course it's not. Is it wrong for Ron to want to be a doctor? But he's got to examine his motives. And you've got to, if you're going to be someone caught up in an accounting or a legal or some other, starting a business to make lots and lots of money, or becoming a doctor, which is a huge investment, or we can all make money in all sorts of ways. No, it's not. It's not wrong to do those things. And we need Christian doctors and lawyers and politicians, but do not discount the dangers and the pull of this world. And how do you do that? Well, you keep yourself grounded in church, grounded in the gospel, and soaked in the word. And you're managing your time, you prioritize your spirit. I bet all those people that Jules was referring to have given up on their devotions, are minimizing church, are forgetting about their basic spiritual disciplines of loving God with their time.
Yeah, I agree, John. If I could share personally, I mean, it's always, I guess, a danger when you've got a profession that you see colleagues who have the capacity to earn a lot of money or to achieve a lot of power. And you're quite right. It's I think the people I've seen sort of fall into that trap are the people who have minimalized interaction with the church, minimalized devotion. They sort of succumb to the gifts of their job, and I think that they're left quite empty. But as you rightly pointed out, we do need people in all aspects of professions. A large number of people who give abundantly to missionaries and to Christian organizations are those high-earning Christian businessmen or businesswomen. And you do need people in those professions to witness to their colleagues. But I also see that, it is very, very easy and tempting to kind of fall away and be lured by the power, the status, and the money. I think you're right. Just as a person, in such a profession, and I include like other professions like lawyers, business people, politicians, just staying grounded in the Word, having fellowship with Christians, devoting your time to the church, praying continuously, all very important things. And remembering, that God can use you in those circumstances. but as I agree, loving God, loving others, certainly, yeah, the principles to live by.
Thanks, Ron. Appreciate your input and letting me pick on you, mate. I felt comfortable because, you know, I love you. And in the New Testament, there's a lot of emphasis on building the local church, giving locally, sharing possessions. Yep. But in modern Australia, in the context of northwestern suburb of Sydney, is there wisdom to redistribute most of our financial tithe to cover the ministry outside of our local church? Charmaine, good question again. One of the struggles I think we face in the modern West is that the government's picked up a lot of social need issues, and that's not a bad thing, but often the needs that Christians jumped into in society are being met for better and for worse at times by government agencies. There's great need in our world for many of those things. So is there wisdom in redistributing most of the financial tithe to other ministries outside our local church? What I will say is this: church should be central to your life. I'm not talking about money, I'm talking about the way you live your life, because of the whole nature of gathering and the whole nature of the people of God and the centrality of the gospel in the person of Jesus. The church is the body of Christ. Church should be central to how you approach your life. And that I mean locally, because it's about relationships. It's not about a building, it's not about a pastor or leaders, it's about relationships and the place of Jesus in your life. And so you should support as a priority your local church, and your local church should be generous and ministering beyond itself for the sake of the kingdom. But it also needs to care for the church. So how we do that, I guess that's what we wrestle with. If your local church is impoverished, that's not a good thing. I guess we'd be healthy enough as a church. I guess all of life is church. So yeah, there's a point to what Charmaine says, that it's maybe better for us to be giving to other things. I think you should be factoring that, but you need to care for your local church. And that means finances and time. You need to be ministering in your local church. If you're just doing parachurch ministries, I don't think that's a healthy pattern. That becomes your church, because that becomes the body of Christ where you serve. You need to there's almost a split. I'm not saying parachurch ministry is bad, but I'm just saying your local church really matters. Because these are the people you're in a relationship with in Jesus Christ. What if I've worked in an area where it's not God's calling? Is it irresponsible to work in a well-paid job if it's not God's calling? With me having good motives of giving more. I think that's an interesting question. I'm not sure exactly what, Sean, you mean by God's calling, but I think any job where you can glorify God is a good thing. And you can glorify God by picking up garbage bins. You can glorify God by working for a legal firm. I'm not sure if you can glorify God that much if you intentionally always in a legal firm are defending crooks for their innocence. I'm not sure if you can glorify God that well if you're constantly encouraging gambling. I don't know if you can glorify God that much if you're trying to make wealth out of the suffering of others. So they're good questions to ask. We all need to ask those for our work, but companies need to make profits. If you want to live in a non-profit company, you're living in a fantasy land. Companies will sink if they're not companies in the free market need to be competitive, otherwise a competitor will take them down. So margin is not wrong. Getting healthy margins are not wrong. They're the sort of questions you need to ask. I think the question with a lot of those things is our profits being taken at the unjust expense of others? These are not easy things we live in a system, we live in a world, so these are not easy questions to ask. But I think if you're doing good work where you can glorify God, then I'd call that God's calling.
But what if there's like a field of work that you think it's more suited to you later? That's it.
That's just a wisdom life issue, Sean, I think.
Sure. Thanks.
You know, seriously, if you're at university studying to become a physiotherapist and you're working in Coles, well, glorify God while you're at Coles. That's your calling. There is an emphasis about being prudent with our spending and then saving. Yep, that's right. And I agree with that. We should be wise with our spending. However, what about the parable of the rich fool? Are we not trusting God with our finances by trying to save? What about the fact that we don't know when God will call us home? Hope these things make sense. Yeah, the parable of the rich fool, probably a lot that could be said there, but it's really about is money your idol? There's lots of encouragement in the scriptures, like, you know, the like bits that Gim read. There's the Proverbs 31, the wise, the wife of noble character. There's lots of encouragement to be prudent and sensible. You take people like Priscilla and Aquila or others in the New Testament who seem to have no judgment on them, who are almost certainly, the woman in Philippi, what was her name? Almost certainly wealthy people.
Lydia,
Thanks, Joe, who are a great blessing to the church. There is no problem with wealth. There is no problem with accumulating wealth. Everything gets back to the heart. And whether we will love God with all our heart, soul, and mind and strength, and whether we'll love our neighbour as ourselves. And so I think if you can become wealthy, the problem with the rich fool was he was a fool. He thought that his money was his life. He thought that this resource of power that he'd been able to accumulate meant that he was something and was independent of God. He's a fool. The fact that he had barns full of stuff was not a problem. The problem was how he viewed those barns full of stuff and what he wanted to do with them and how he viewed his life and his sense of control. He was not in control. It was all a gift of God, a resource that he could use to love God and love others, which he failed to do in his planning. I'm pretty strong with my answers. I guess this is stuff that I don't mean to be strong. I get like this sometimes. Could serving the local church and spending time be seen as a non-negotiable? Yeah, I think so. That's a non-negotiable. Wherever local church is for you, and it could be lots of different ways. You've got to do that. Thank you very, very much, Jesse. Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you, everyone, for listening and being so patient with my rantings. And thank you for Jin, Gim, and Ron for chipping in with their wisdom when I stopped ranting. Thanks, people. Love yous.